In September of 1949, a 17-year-old black teenager named David Hanley was shot in the back and killed by Lexington police officers. His crime? Going too close to a white neighborhood. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a product of a system built to criminalize black presence in white spaces and to protect those who enforced that boundary with violence. Today, I want to share David's story. Not just what happened the night he was killed, but how the city responded, how his memory was manipulated by newspapers, and what justice looked like and didn't look like in early 1950s Lexington. And finally, I want to talk about what it means to remember him today and what a restorative vision for our city could look like. On the night of his death, David Hanley was near the corner of 5th and Walnut, a few blocks from his home on North Upper Street. Lexington police were called on a prowler report, and Officer James Glass arrested Hanley. Police later claimed Hanley was connected to a string of burglaries, but no evidence was ever produced. In fact, Officer Glass later admitted in a newspaper quote that no burglary had occurred that night. Hanley had simply been seen walking across a porch in a white neighborhood. After his arrest, Hanley was put in a cruiser with officers Foster and Lewis. According to their account, he tried to grab a firearm, seized a blackjack instead, and fled the vehicle. As he ran, he was shot in the back at the corner of 6th Street and Limestone, the current location of Owl's Bar and Arcadium. He died a few hours later at St. Joseph's Hospital. The city's response to Hanley's killing was not investigation. It was protection. Protection for the officers, for the department, and for a historical system of racial discrimination. No full investigation was conducted. No coroner's report was released. Commissioner Henry Heddle told the NAACP attorney that he would also have shot to kill. City Manager J. Pelham Johnston dismissed calls for a transparent investigation, saying a review had already taken place. Even after David was shot, the negligence continued. His father, Spencer Hanley, wasn't told about the shooting until more than 2 hours later. Officers showed up at his door to tell him that his son had been involved in an accident and may need a donation of Spencer's blood. When officers took him to the hospital, they stopped on the way to casually chat with a reckless driver they recognized. That delay meant that by the time Spencer arrived in the hospital, his son was already dead. In addition, the evidence was conflicting. An autopsy performed by Dr. Marshall Jones and Dr. Henry Sweets Jr. revealed significant bruising and abrasions that some doctors attributed to a fall and others to blunt force trauma. Funeral director Charles Cunningham said that such bruising was consistent with a beating. Neighbor Leslie Floyd stated that he witnessed the officers beating David after they shot him. The officers denied this, and conflicting medical opinions were never reconciled. Nothing was resolved, and none of these evidentiary gaps were pursued to the extent that they should have been. From the very beginning, the city of Lexington tried to shape David Hanley's story. In newspaper articles, they pushed the idea that he was dangerous, that he was a criminal, that he brought this on himself. They referred to him as a suspect, a burglar, and a prowler, and talked about his killing in quotation marks, as if they didn't believe it really was one. At trial, police stories changed. Early reports said nothing about Hanley behaving threateningly or using a weapon, but by the time they were in court, David Hanley was, according to the officers, swinging a blackjack at them, behaving aggressively, and stood over 6 feet tall, weighing at least 185 pounds. Lexington Mayor Tom Mooney publicly quoted Spencer Hanley as saying he was not surprised by his son's death and that he had been concerned about him, using a grieving parent's words to imply that David's death was expected, maybe even deserved. In court, the defense leaned on fear. They painted David as a threat. In closing arguments, one attorney called him a hardened criminal with murder in his heart and said his death had directly reduced local crime. David Hanley was a teenage boy. None of this was true. So what did justice look like in 1950s Lexington? At first, it looked like silence. The chief of police said that they couldn't bring charges because they didn't know which of the 4 officers who had shot at Hanley was the one who had hit and killed him. Initially, no officers were held responsible at all. It took months of pressure from the Black community just to reopen the case. And even when they did, only 2 of the 4 officers who fired their weapons at Hanley were charged. The first trial ended in a hung jury, 11-1 in favor of acquittal. In the retrial, despite overwhelming evidence that Hanley was unarmed, fleeing, and shot in the back, Foster and Lewis were acquitted. That verdict was not justice. It was protectionism, and it sent a message, loud and clear, that Black lives could be taken in Lexington without consequence. Afterward, Foster and Lewis weren't punished. They were rewarded. Their defense attorneys were honored with lifetime memberships in the Fraternal Order of Police, and the officers continued to receive financial support through the union during their suspension. And then, less than a year later, both were accused of another police brutality case, this time involving an attorney visiting from Chicago. One was convicted, but neither should have still been wearing a badge. The system that failed David Hanley failed the community further by allowing those officers who had shot and killed a 17-year-old boy to remain in positions of power. Hanley was first seen by police at the corner of East 5th and Walnut, which today is North Martin Luther King Boulevard. East 5th was a predominantly Black street, while Walnut and North Limestone were predominantly white areas. Hanley's own home street, Upper North, was also in a predominantly Black neighborhood. So based on where he was first seen and where the chase ended, it looks like Hanley was crossing through what was essentially a racial border zone. Hanley's death has to be viewed in this context. He crossed into a white-coated space, and that act alone, just being there, was treated as criminal. The officers didn't just see a young teenage boy. They saw someone who had violated an invisible law. When Hanley was shot, he wasn't armed in any meaningful way. He was holding a blackjack, not a firearm, and he was trying to flee. He had his back to the officers. He posed no danger. Still, officers opened fire. The traditional legal system failed David Hanley. It failed to protect him, failed to investigate his death, and failed to hold anyone accountable. But restorative justice asks a different set of questions. What harm occurred? Who was impacted? And what do we owe each other now? It means creating public memory, investing in healing, and transforming a landscape of silence into one of truth. Restorative justice isn't just ethical, it's strategic. Public acknowledgement can restore trust. City leaders can take responsibility for historical harm and take a stand in a different direction in the present. By naming what happened, we make it harder for injustice to repeat itself. Memorialization isn't just about mourning, it's about preventing future harm. Restorative justice does not mean forgive and forget. It means remembering deeply and responding intentionally. David Hanley's story is not just about the past. It speaks directly to our present. It shows how systems defined location and belonging through racialized lenses, how police enforced those definitions with violence, and how the legal system protected that violence instead of challenging it. We can't undo what happened, but we can tell the truth. We can name the harm, and we can begin to repair. Justice for David Hanley starts with memory, but it doesn't end there. It continues in the choices we make now, in how we remember, how we respond, and how we refuse to let silence win.